Hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen in to my presentation, Saddle Up and Regulate, Addressing Sensory Needs in and Out of the Saddle. So just a quick disclaimer before I begin, this video was created as part of an occupational therapy capstone project, and the purpose is to educate and provide resources for working with sensory needs of individuals in and out of an equine-centered environment. It is not meant to substitute advice from a licensed OT practitioner working one-on-one with a child. So I want to start off this video by encouraging you to think about how you prefer to sleep at night. Do you need a light on, or do you prefer total darkness? Do you sleep in total silence, or do you need white noise in the background, such as with a white noise machine? Do you sleep with a lot of pillows and blankets, or just a couple? Everyone watching this video is going to have different preferences in this regard, just like everyone has a favorite food and a least favorite food. When I first started putting this video and presentation together, I collected input from various parents and volunteers at a therapeutic horseback riding facility, and while about half these volunteers and parents had a pretty good idea of what sensory needs are, about half the surveys I got back were only filled out halfway, and I was given the statement, "My rider isn't sensory," simply because their rider didn't directly struggle with touch or sound sensations. But this just isn't true. We're all sensory beings who take in a lot of sensory input on a daily basis. That's the beauty of being a living, breathing human. So as you know, we take in all this input from our environment using our senses. You're probably familiar with the basic five you learned about in kindergarten: vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. I won't go in depth with these since I assume you understand them pretty well. But there's also three more senses that we use for taking in our environment to make a total of 8 senses. The first of these other senses is proprioception, which is your deep body sense. This sense is activated by squeeze, and you feel it in your muscles and joints. It tells you, for example, how much of a squeeze someone is giving you when you're hugging, whether it's a light hug or a big bear hug. It also tells you where your body is in space, so even when your eyes are closed, you still know where your hands are in space without having to look at them because of proprioception. The next sense we experience is the vestibular sense. So this is your sense of balance and movement. It tells you where your head is in space and where you're moving. It works with your visual system to compare what you feel to what you see. It tells you if you're dizzy or moving in a car or swinging or even going upside down. And finally, we have interoception, which is the inner body sense of making meaning of your feelings. This can be a biological process, such as, "I'm feeling a rumble in my stomach, I must be hungry." Or it can be an emotional process, such as, "My face is hot and my hands are getting clammy, I must be embarrassed." So this is the sense that makes sense of your sensations. Now, most people can take in, process, and respond to the sensory input in their environment in an appropriate manner. We refer to this as sensory regulation. However, sometimes we experience sensory dysregulation, which is the result of imbalance due to over or understimulation. Now, everyone watching this video has felt regulation, overstimulation, and understimulation. Think about a time where maybe you went to a large sporting event or a concert, and the noise was too much and you needed a break. What did you do? Maybe you stepped outside for fresh air, or maybe you disappeared into the bathroom where the sound is muffled a bit. These are examples of adaptive responses, which are responses to dysregulation to help return to a balanced state. You may also use adaptive responses when you're understimulated, such as when you're sitting in a boring work meeting or a boring class. Maybe you doodle, or you fidget with a ring, or you click a pen to help you stay focused. Now, most people figure out over time how they best respond to over and understimulation. However, most young kids don't have this life experience yet and may need some help. And kids with sensory processing difficulties may need even more help. And what this assistance looks like is a little different for everyone. So from here, there are 4 main patterns that people can follow when taking in sensory information. So to simplify these patterns, I want to compare this process to getting a cup of coffee, where the coffee is the sensory input and the cup is how much you can take in at one time. Some people want a big cup of coffee or a sensory input, and some people just want a little cup. So that's the up and down on this graph pictured here. The left to right is the degree in which people seek out input. So the right side is the active side, the people really seeking out the coffee or really avoiding it altogether. While the left side is the people who don't really seek it out, but they're on a walk and they pass a coffee shop, so they figure they might as well stop in for a cup since it's already there. So from here, most people can fall into any of these four categories and to varying extents. So first up, in the upper right of this graph, is your sensory seekers. These people have a big cup. They love coffee. They need a full cup of coffee at all times, and they need that coffee cup full just to function. In regular life, you'll see these people as the wiggle worms. They may seek out loud music, and they may seek out intense experiences like rocking, spinning, jumping, and squeezing. On horseback, these are the riders who can't sit still. They can't pay attention well if their horse isn't moving. They get really antsy if their horse stops, and they love the faster gaits from the horses since the extra movement provides even more input. On the bottom left of the graph, you have the sensory avoiders. So these people have a small cup and they actively keep it empty. They do not want coffee, they just want the cute mug. They may only take small sips of coffee or avoid it altogether. In regular life, you may see this as riders being visibly avoidant and getting upset with sensations they don't like, such as loud music. They may show adaptive responses such as covering their ears, running away, or having a meltdown. On horseback, these riders may only want to go slow, or may even be terrified to get on the horse. They may not like the feeling of wearing the helmet. Any unexpected movements may be scary to them, such as the horse spooking, coughing, or sneezing. Then in the lower left, you have these sensory sensitive people. They don't need a lot of input. They may get distracted by the latte swirls or the cute patterns on the coffee mug, and they might even forget to drink the coffee. In real life, you see people getting distracted easily with loud noise or TV in the background. They have trouble tuning out things happening in the background, such as cars driving by or people walking by outside. Now, most people can tune these things out, but other people have difficulty doing this. On horseback, you see this in riders constantly being distracted from their lesson. They may get distracted easily by things like other riders in the lesson, or barn cats running by, or even just parents watching. And finally, you have the low registration category in the upper left. So these people have a big cup and they like it full, but they get so lost in drinking the coffee that they forget to actually taste the flavoring. So they see the big picture, but they may miss the small details that make up the big picture. In real life, you may see these people as the daydreamers. They may not show a response when their name is called, not because they're ignoring you, but because they don't even realize that you're saying their name. On horseback, the same thing can happen. They may be calmed by the horse's movement and take it all in and love the feeling, but then they don't realize they're about to run into a wall or cut someone off in the arena. Now, realistically, no one is in one category all the time. Maybe someone seeks out coffee but only needs a medium-sized cup, or maybe someone avoids coffee but will drink it if it's 95% cream or 5% coffee. Similarly, someone may be sensitive and get distracted by sounds, but they seek out the vestibular input and they really like spinning, but they hate loud noises and avoid them. People can fall anywhere on this chart in varying degrees in many different ways. But when people consistently fall on the far ends of this chart and they can't regulate appropriately, this is where we see sensory difficulties arise. And we also see sensory difficulties arise in ways that may not seem like sensory issues at first. So pictured here is a very simplified pyramid of learning. The idea is that lower needs on the pyramid have to be met before higher level needs can be met. Notice that the base of the pyramid is the sensory system. The successful development of the sensory system in our early years lays the base for success in the rest of the pyramid. The second level of the pyramid builds on developmental skills. This includes knowing your left from your right, being aware of two sides of your body and using the two sides together, the ability to hold attention on a task, as well as hand-eye coordination, which is important for things like shoe tying, handwriting, steering your horse, and correctly brushing the horse. And then we have the third layer on this pyramid, which includes learning skills, such as using social interaction skills, managing behavior, and academic learning. These skills are all impacted by the ability to complete all lower level skills on the pyramid. So this pyramid really emphasizes just how important our sensory systems are, even for people who don't obviously struggle with touch or noise sensations. Now, when I say academic learning, this applies in the saddle too, such as when riders need to retain what they learned in the last week's lesson about how to steer the horse and how to cue the horse to stop and go, and even how to be safe around horses. So if you have a rider struggling to remember how to hold the reins, for example, that rider may have trouble tuning out unimportant information to make room for new information that they have to learn. I also want to note that oftentimes teachers or parents may mark behaviors as choosing to be bad, when it's often attributed to lower level needs not being met. And this is different from a child throwing a tantrum because they want a toy and their parents said no, and it's different from kids just having a bad day because of medication changes or changes in routine. But kids who are struggling to meet lower level needs may get frustrated and act out as a result. You may even see behaviors such as hitting, kicking, and biting because these actions do in fact meet a proprioceptive need, just not in an appropriate way. So from here, I also want to talk about the main areas of sensory difficulty that people may struggle with. The most common area that you may see, and what people most often think of when they think of sensory issues, is sensory reactivity, which is when someone is over or under responsive to sensations like pressure, pain, movement, or sounds. They may react in a way that is more extreme than what the situation may look like it calls for. One of the most common forms of sensory reactivity, what most people think of when they hear sensory issues, is tactile defensiveness, which is over-responding to touch sensations. Outside the barn, you may see sensitivity to clothing tags and textures, as well as picky eating. Riders in an equine setting may struggle with saddle textures, the feeling of the horse's hair, the feeling of a properly fitted helmet, or wearing the proper footwear. Gravitational insecurity is also a huge issue that you may see kids struggle with. So this is a form of over-responsiveness to vestibular sensations. So people with this issue may struggle with excessive fear with movement activities that may be considered ordinary, specifically when the person's feet are off the ground or with changing head movements. So this issue makes it difficult for kids to enjoy playground equipment like swings and monkey bars. Now think of what movements are required to mount and dismount a horse. Getting both feet off the ground and changing the position of your head to get your body onto the horse's back or off the horse's back onto the ground. This would probably be pretty stressful to a rider with gravitational insecurity. And this is different from first-time jitters or being nervous to get back on a horse after falling off. This is riders who may have been riding for years, and yet they still get very nervous in getting on and off the horse. And this is a very real and scary feeling for them. So just like you'd work with a rider with first-time jitters, just take things slow and keep things positive to make this a positive experience for the riders. Another difficulty you may find is in the area of sensory discrimination and perception. So this is being able to tell a difference between sensory stimuli and give meaning to it. This may be seen in kids struggling with balance and coordination because they have poor body awareness. They may have a lot of difficulty telling where their body is in space. If you notice issues with balance and coordination on the ground, then it's likely the rider may have balance and coordination difficulties in the saddle. They may have a tendency to lean or sit crooked in the saddle, as they may not even be able to tell that they're leaning or sitting crooked. Or they may have trouble with their center of gravity, so they may try to lean too far out of the saddle and then not realize they're unbalanced. They may lean over to look at a cone, but not even realize that their whole body is leaning too. Another area that we see with sensory difficulty is vestibular bilateral function. So this is difficulty with vestibular processing, as well as the ability to coordinate both sides of your body at once to do the same or different things. This often impacts things like head and trunk control, your sense of balance, and using two sides of your body at once. It also affects your ability to cross midline, or the imaginary line that splits your body into the left and right sides, which is important for a lot of different activities in life. Around horses, you may see this with riders who struggle to help with sweeping the aisles. Holding a broom and bringing it from one side to another to make a coordinated sweep would be difficult for some of these riders. In the saddle, they may have trouble scanning the arena for a certain marker on the arena wall, or scanning the arena for the next obstacle in a riding pattern. A lot of times they have difficulty with only pulling the reins with one hand and not the other. And finally, the last main issue that comes with sensory processing difficulty is praxis, which is the ability to conceptualize, plan, and execute a non-habitual motor act. In layman's terms, say I were to give you 3 actions to complete. Put your left foot forward, put your hands on your hips, and twist left to right. Did you picture yourself doing all that in your head? Great, that's the first step. Now the next step is to plan out what you're going to do and how. Then finally, complete all 3 actions in order, without messing up, without getting 2 actions mixed up, all while avoiding hitting any obstacles. Your ability to do all that is praxis. You would see difficulty in this area in individuals who look at an obstacle course and have no idea where to start or how to do a step. On horseback, these riders may not know how to start a riding pattern or how to complete a certain step. Or they may forget the order of steps and do it wrong. Or they may complete the pattern, but they completely forget that they need to watch out for other riders too. Now I also want to briefly talk about some of the horse's sensory needs, since some of you watching may not be super familiar with how horses take in sensory input. Horses rely heavily on their sensory systems because it helps them survive in the wild. They're prey animals, which means they have eyes on the sides of their heads to give them almost 360 degrees of vision. Their ears can rotate about 180 degrees to help them pinpoint where a sound is coming from. They use these senses together to help them find predators in the wild, so they are naturally very sensitive to input from sight and hearing. In addition, horses that don't like a sensation will do what they can to address that sensation. It's important to be aware that horses are big animals, and they may not try to hurt you, but they may pass on a message that they don't like what they see or feel or hear. So horses that don't like the saddle being tightened may act grumpy and try to nip at the person doing the tightening. Or horses who get nervous and see something potentially scary may spook or get startled and try to run from the situation. And horses in adaptive horseback riding programs are pretty accustomed to a lot of noises and sights, but you still want to use a bit of caution that you aren't the reason a horse spooks, especially while a rider is mounted. So that was a lot of information about a large variety of topics within the world of sensory needs. So how does all of this apply to what we do with horses in the adaptive horseback riding setting? I want to start this conversation off with the barn environment can be very overstimulating. There's the ever-present arena dirt and the dust. There's the smell of the barn. There's the helmets our riders have to wear. And those helmets have to be snug on the riders' heads in order to do their job properly. There's the constant movement of the horse underneath our riders. And there's so many other things happening in the barn that can easily distract and overwhelm our riders. There's barn cats fighting. There's other riders in the lesson. There's a tractor turning on outside. There's a horse pooping, and it smells gross. All of this to say, give our riders some grace, even if they aren't obviously someone who seeks or avoids sensory input. In the same boat, we also want to consider that each rider comes from different backgrounds, and this may affect how they react to sensory input. Especially in today's world with mental health issues on the rise, I would highly recommend learning about how to be trauma informed so that you can best meet the needs of your rider, but also in working with people in general who may have undergone trauma, because you never know who you might meet or what their backgrounds may be. Something else I want to point out is to be aware of how the rider is positioned on the horse. Even for riders who don't struggle with body awareness, leaning too far forward or too far backwards is a common issue for riders. So make sure that the riders you work with are sitting tall and aren't leaning too much and are sitting in the center of the saddle for their safety. Additionally, issues with balance, muscle tone, using the left and right sides of their body, and crossing the midline will often show up on horseback. So just be aware of these things since these are some areas that riders may need to work on. And finally, as instructors and volunteers, we need to know how to best address the sensory needs of each rider while also being mindful of the horse's sensory experiences. We don't want to introduce, let's say, a noisy fidget for a kiddo on horseback before we introduce the horse to it first. You may need to let the horse sniff it first to help them learn that it isn't something scary. This is going to be for the horse's benefit and for the rider's safety, since we don't want a horse to spook with a rider on their back if we can avoid it at all. So now for the fun part, addressing sensory needs, whether that be in or out of the saddle. I want to start this section with a few disclaimers and tips to help you out. The first point I want to talk about is to avoid forcing a tactile or touch experience on a child. Forcing a child to touch something they don't want to can be way too overwhelming, and it can make their issues with that texture worse if you force it. New textures will be handled best if they're explored under the child's control. You can also give the child tools to handle these textures if the child isn't ready to directly touch them, such as handing them a brush to brush the horse instead of directly petting the horse. If you're introducing a rider or a kiddo in general to a new environment, you may want to use caution if you know the environment could be overstimulating. You may want to bring along items that the child finds comfort in, such as a stuffed toy, if you know that these items will help them calm down to regulate a bit better. With the vestibular sense, I want to state that you should be careful if you're seeking to stimulate this sense. So this is the one affected by jumping, spinning, swinging. It's also the sense where overload can cause nausea and vomiting, such as with motion sickness. So if you don't know the child well, be careful how much you stimulate this sense. If they're overloaded, they might show signs right away, or they might show signs even a few hours later. If you start to notice any paleness or any signs that they're getting overloaded, they may benefit from intense proprioceptive input, such as tight squeezes, chewing on something like gum, or sucking on an ice cube to give them that proprioceptive input in their jaw. When in doubt, start small. And this applies to everything you may do to look at stimulating a child's sensory system, since you don't want to send them into overload. And finally, what you do to one side, do to the other. You want to strengthen both sides, and the best way is to do activities to target both sides to make them strong. So let's start by looking at experiences on the ground in the barn, because not all experiences have to be in the saddle. There's actually so many sights and textures to explore on the ground in the barn. There's petting and grooming the horses. Maybe you can teach a kiddo to braid the mane if there's time. Let them explore different textures you'd find around the barn, like feeling the texture of the hay, or the shavings, or the grain. You can also have riders assist with barn chores, such as sweeping and getting tack ready, as much as your facility allows, of course. Similarly, you can have them help get the arena set up and have them do a riding pattern on the ground before getting on the horse. And this isn't a sensory activity at first, but it helps to work on coordinating the left and right sides of the body, as well as praxis and motor planning. This is especially great for teens and adults, whether or not they ride at the barn. If your facility has a sensory room and your riders need to use it, then use it. Sensory rooms are not meant to be used as a playroom, but as a quiet place to help the rider regulate their sensory system before getting on the horse. In a pinch, a tack room or bathroom or storage closet can function to at least give the rider a quiet place to relax. Just check with the staff first before taking riders in any of these areas for safety, and so the instructor knows where you and the rider are. So in the saddle, there are a lot of activities that you may see instructors doing with riders to enhance their sensory experiences. Petting the horse while on horseback is the most obvious one, and this is also great for building core strength since it requires leaning forward to pet the horse's neck. In fact, reaching and leaning in all directions on horseback, when appropriate, is fantastic for building core strength. Now I'm going to use this moment to say, wait a moment before making a task easier for riders. During my time watching adaptive riding lessons, I have seen a good number of very well-meaning volunteers step in to bring a bucket closer for riders to drop something into, or bring a pool ring directly to the rider instead of letting them reach for it, or telling them the next step in the pattern rather than giving them the chance to remember it themselves. Now, I understand where these well-meaning volunteers are coming from. They work with this population to help them, and they want to help them succeed. But this extra help doesn't help them improve the rider's overall abilities in the long run. Plus, letting the rider try it on their own is great for building their independence. Now, if you give them a chance to do it themselves and they still can't, it's okay to step in and help at that point. But give them a chance first before you do that. Something else instructors and volunteers can do is doing exercises with crossing midline, or crossing the imaginary line splitting your body into left and right sides. So think about exercises such as touching your hand to your opposite knee, or reaching your hand to the opposite side of the horse's neck. Some riders may need a visual to help them out, so you could use beanbags or a small ball, or even your hand to help facilitate these movements. So what do you do if your rider starts experiencing sensory dysregulation? How do you even know that this is happening? What this might look like looks different for everyone. Some riders who may normally be happy and cheerful may suddenly become annoyed at everything. Some riders may cover their ears or try to run away from the situation. Some riders may become very distracted by everything and not be able to focus, needing to be constantly redirected to pay attention. And some riders may try to cause harm to themselves or others, since doing so does in fact meet a sensory need. Think of hitting, punching, or biting, just not in an appropriate way. There's no one way to help every rider struggling with this issue. Just like everyone has different sensory preferences, everyone also has different ways of dealing with dysregulation. The first big step in figuring this out is getting to know your rider. Learn about things they like and things they don't. Chat with parents or caregivers. This can be a great way to help figure this out. Plus, it'll help build trust and rapport with the kiddo's family. If the kiddo is able to communicate their likes and dislikes with you, then you can also talk to the kiddo about these things. Instructors who have been working with the rider for a while can also tell you about what they like and dislike while in the saddle or in the barn. Forming a line of communication early on between instructors, volunteers, families, and the rider, if they're able to, is going to go a long way with building a good relationship based on trust. Validating the rider's feelings will also go a long way in building rapport with the rider. When people are frustrated to the point of melting down, it doesn't matter how old they are. Most people just want to know that you care, you're listening, and you're there to help however you can. When possible, try to give riders a choice, such as, do you want to wear the black helmet or the green helmet? Should we start brushing the horse on the left or the right side? I noticed you're frustrated and you may need a break. Should we take that break in the mounting area or in the sensory room? Sometimes riders may get frustrated and act out because they don't feel in control of their environment or their own feelings. In a riding environment, there may be a lot of things that can make them feel powerless. Maybe they want to ride a different horse. Maybe they want to go a different speed than they are in that moment. Giving them a choice when you can helps them to feel like they're getting back some control. I also want to encourage you to learn what resources your facility has to offer. If your facility has a sensory room, spend some time in there outside of lesson times to see what tools are available. Or if there isn't a sensory room, just go through some of the activities the barn has. You might feel silly, but try some things out. Go on the swing and play on the tactile wall. Go through all the bins and think about how riders may react to different tools. If you're watching today and you're an instructor or you help oversee a barn that has a sensory room, I encourage you to find an occupational therapist who works with kids to check it out and give you suggestions on what to add or change. One of the things that makes occupational therapy unique from other therapy fields is our understanding of sensory processing and how to address sensory needs. So take advantage of this knowledge when you can. And finally, I want to encourage you to just try things out, reasonably of course. Use your best judgment. If you think it's going to be distracting to a rider or to the horse, then don't try it. If you're a volunteer, I encourage you to check with the instructor before you bring a tool out with the rider, since they will often know the horses and riders best and what they can handle. Some riders may benefit from constant moving rather than stopping a lot during lessons, since this will help them to keep happy in the saddle. And some riders may need a break in the sensory room before or after their lesson, or even during their lesson. Some riders can be redirected with high fives. This gives them a little bit of extra proprioceptive input. Some riders may benefit from visual cues, such as with a social story, or a visual schedule, or a visual timer. But in reality, you don't know if a sensory tool is going to work for a child unless you try it out. If it doesn't work, then try something else. What works with one kiddo may not work for another kiddo, even if they demonstrate similar behaviors. Or they could just be having a bad day and nothing works. As my Aunt Angela once widely said, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So how about addressing these needs out of the saddle? The riders we work with may only spend an hour per week in the saddle, or maybe less. While it would be amazing to take the horses home with the riders and throw them on whenever they need it, that's just not realistic. So for additional resources on sensory needs at home, I've included some resources you can explore for more general sensory processing knowledge. Harkla.co has lots of resources and educational materials for parents or anyone looking for more information. Harkla also has a great podcast available, All Things Sensory, which is created by OT practitioners about so many sensory-based topics. The STAR Institute also has lots of great resources, especially if you go to the resources tab on their website. And finally, the occupational therapist has a website and a Facebook page full of all kinds of education relating to school-based OT, sensory processing, and general parenting topics. So, in conclusion, don't immediately write off behaviors from a child as just choosing to be bad, because often there's more to the story than the eye can see. A little empathy will go a long way, no matter how old the rider is that you're working with. If you're in doubt, start small and build up from there. And if you're stuck, consult an OT practitioner. And finally, thank the horses that make these experiences possible. We wouldn't be here without their kindness and support. So thank you so much for listening into my video. Adaptive horseback riding is a fantastic way to make a difference, and I wish you nothing but the best on your adventures in volunteering.